without further ado, our third session, climate risk management, and Yoli, if I hand across to you, um, please take it away.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Stephen. And I'd like to greet you all. Good evening. It's good evening here in Manila, but good morning and good afternoon to all of you out there who are in different parts of the world. I would like to thank the GSMA for this opportunity to share what we are doing around this part of the world, so to speak. So let's begin. I have my two colleagues here with me, Apple and Ava. Maybe just a brief background of who we are. We are Globe Telecom. We corner about 83.1 million customers in the country, and we are one of the two major players here in the Philippines. We are also the number one mobile provider here in the Philippines. We are a purpose-led organization, and we've introduced so many different partnerships here in the country. Um, we call ourselves the purveyor of the Filipino digital lifestyle. We're very strong with content partnerships, Netflix, Spotify, NBA, etc. And we also have investments in our non-core telco business. Non-core meaning outside of the regular uh, SMS, call, and data, right? So 917 Ventures is our largest corporate incubator. Mint is our financial technology company. Um, and we have Consulta MD, which is also our telemedicine company. So as you can imagine, both our fintech and our telemedicine companies are doing very, very well today because it is one of the things that people are really looking for in order to be able to cope with the pandemic, right? So we also have Kickstart, which is our startup company. They are venture capital. They do investments even for startups outside of the Philippines. We have Globe Labs, which is an innovation company, and AdSpark is a digital advertising company. We support the 10 of the 17 UN Sustainable Goals. Right. So next slide, please, Apple. So in terms of our purpose and our sustainability in action, we anchor our sustainability on obviously our purpose of in everything we do, we treat people right to do a globe of good. Also, we have four sustainability focus areas, which is care for the environment, digital nation, care for people, and positive societal impact. Next slide, Apple. So just to give you a lay of our land, I don't know if many of you have gone to the Philippines or have visited our country. We are located in Southeast Asia, and we are an archipelagic nation. We're composed of 7,107 islands. We're smaller than Indonesia. Indonesia is two times or three times larger than us. However, because of where we are very prone to climate-related hazards. We are visited by at least 24 typhoons a year. It's a normal occurrence. When you see rain here, I don't know if you've seen Forrest Gump, when he described the kinds of different rains that he has experienced. We have it all here, all types of rains, right? We have a super typhoon, we have tropical cyclones, we have floods and storm surges, and obviously landslides and drought. So, because of the extreme weather events in the Philippines, it is very important to take a look at how we can help mitigate climate risks, especially as a telco. Next slide, please, Apple. Okay. So in 2013, I don't know if you've heard of Typhoon Haiyan, which is also my namesake, which is Yolanda. Typhoon Haiyan hit us in 2013. Uh, the most one of the strongest typhoons that ever hit us in the country. And so, because of Typhoon Haiyan, we had to rethink the way that we do our infrastructure in Globe. So we designed our infrastructure for resiliency and building better. We retrofitted our towers to at least take into consideration 350 kilometer per hour winds. We equipped our cell sites also to be able to recover fast with relevant access technologies and redundant transport facilities. We also fortified our fiber optic cables, changing them from aerial to underground, improving our transport connectivity through the use of inland amplifiers, especially for long fiber optic spans. And we use microwave as a redundant transport path to fiber optics. Next slide, Apple. Aside from that learning, we also invested heavily on coming out with rapid deployment solutions. These are our cell site on wheels and our tower on wheels. So these are equipment that we can just get into the area when a typhoon hits and or a storm surge hits and there's no power, there's no connectivity. We just get into the area using this cell site on wheels and tower on wheels. We also have a controller on light truck, which is called the COT. And this kinds of facilities actually provide instantly voice, SMS, up to 2G and 3G voice and 3G data services. Okay, and then we also have our genset on a truck, which is called the GOAT. We invested on a mobile command center just in case, because we are archipelagic, as I said. If the island gets cut off, we're able to deploy a central command center where it is needed, and network in boxes. Okay. Next slide, please, Apple. So the amount of investments that we did in terms of that kind of facility is about a little over $1 million, and actually that did quite a lot for us in terms of being able to cope with a lot of the disasters and typhoons that we've experienced long after Yolanda or Haiyan. In terms of carbon neutrality, we are very proud to declare that our headquarters at the Bonifacio Global Center is already carbon neutral, and along with our headquarters, two other key offices or facilities, which are in Cebu, one of the main islands in Philippines, and in Quezon City, also in the National Capital Region. They're also carbon neutral. And we did this by working closely with one of our group of companies. We belong to the Ayala group of companies. I don't know if you're aware of who the Ayala companies are. So there are two shareholders in Globe. One is Ayala group of companies, and another one is Singtel of Singapore, right? So Ayala Energy, AC Energy, is actually an energy company, and they are heavily investing into renewables. And the way that we're able to achieve carbon neutrality is by getting our energy using our energy company, our electricity using our energy company from the Ayala Group. Next slide. We have also greened the network, so to speak, using lithium batteries, the DC genset, using solar power, and when available, we're able to do free cooling systems using ambient airflow for outside, instead of putting big air conditioners to our cell sites, we sort of turn them over to become free cooling system sites, and of course fuel cells that uses biodegradable fuel. Next. In terms of disaster response, we have a partnership with the NDRRMC, which is a national, it's a It's a government agency, a national government agency on disaster risk and reduction. Okay, so we geo-target disaster-related SMS alerts and cell broadcasts that are being sent to our customers. Now, why is this important? It's important because it allows customers early warning. All right, it's like an early warning system, so that if satellites or some weather reports are actually saying that this typhoon that is incoming in a particular area is going to be super strong, we're able to provide this kind of SMS and cell broadcast. So it allows people or our customers to be able to get out of the area or go to facilities where they are safe. We also empower customers with um, a way by which they're able to contribute to climate risk mitigation, helping the country being able to be more client friendly by contributing to rainforestation using our Globe Rewards and our GCash platform. So we have rainforestation programs totaling about 438 hectares nationwide. We use our Globe Rewards for customers to donate to our rainforestation efforts in Mindanao, which is one of the largest islands also in the Philippines. In GCash, which is our fintech application, there is a there is a toggle, or there is an application that allows you to turn your points whenever you do a digital transaction, you earn points, and when you earn points, it can transform into a way for you to plant trees. Okay, so that's our way of uh, somehow interfacing with our customers so that they themselves will be able to help in terms of reforestation and caring for the environment. So we have existing projects in different parts of the country, from Luzon, Visayas, and Mindanao, okay, covering several hectares, which is about 438 hectares nationwide. Okay, move up, Apple. Okay, so through our partnerships, we are able to do preparedness, response, recovery, and resiliency. Our partners, this is Ayala and Singtel, which are our shareholders, of course. We have a Philippine Disaster Relief Resilience Foundation made up of mostly private sector companies. We partner with the Red Cross, the Metro Manila Development Authority, and the UN OCHA. In terms of disaster relief and response, we usually provide free calls, SMS, and Go Wi-Fi plus free charging whenever there is a disaster area. Aside from that, we provide food packs and volunteer programs. Globe is very big in volunteering. We also provide mobile phones and prepaid load, and aside from that, institutional donations. So in terms of disaster relief, we have a turnaround time. Usually the turnaround time is it's anywhere between 24 to 48 hours. As soon as a disaster strikes, we are there in terms of our relief operations immediately. Next, Apple. So some of the key learnings in terms of our climate risk management and how we're able to build a resilient network. We continuously assess risks and its impact to improve processes and address local climate-related hazards. We invest in building better network infrastructure and newer technologies. We are also guided with relevant ISO standards in terms of business continuity, environmental management, and risk management. It's also important to engage relevant stakeholders, especially our employee workforce that act as volunteers, our external stakeholders such as our vendor partners, the national government agencies and national government, non-government organizations, and our customers. In the end, whenever there is a disaster, we believe that the best thing that any company, especially a telco, can do is to be right there and have your services up and running, because we believe that communication is aid. And with that, I end my presentation. Thank you, Stephen.
Thank you very much, Yoli. That was really interesting. It's not an easy ride that you've got out there in the Philippines, tackling all of those things. Um, Shannon, just before we come on to you, just have some quick Q&A to see if anyone has any questions. Sorry, I think some people maybe are not on mute. If you could go on mute, please. So, any questions for Yoli today?
Yeah, hi,
Hi,
it's
I'm Rosita Rojas from America Mobile, and I wanted to see if it's possible if you could explain a little better how you work with the government for the renewable energy. In
Renewable energy. All right. So, right now in the Philippines, the renewable energy is actually very nascent. The company that we have been working with is actually one of the sister companies also under the Ayala Group. So it's a private company. It's not a government company. Okay. So it's called the AC Energy, and it belongs to the Ayala Group of companies. And because we are sister companies and we all have shared values in terms of caring for environment, in terms of practicing sustainability, I think it's quite easy for us to be able to work together. But it also takes, at some point, commitment coming from the company like Globe to to say that it's important to invest in renewables and to have green energy, right? Just an example, also, one of our sister companies is in water. So we are in telco and we have a sister company who is in water, another utility. And the water company is called Manila Water. And Manila Water has very recently, during this COVID period, actually came out with green bonds. So that is proof that all of us in the Ayala group of company is actually very serious in practicing sustainability.
Thanks, Yoli. I think we had another question there that somebody was asking as well.
yeah, hi, it's thanks, Stephen. It's Joop from the GSMA Europe office. Great presentation, thank you very much. I had one question
Yeah.
about diesel and fuel cells. So what I understand is that a few years ago, it was not really possible to power a base station solely with solar power panels, but that you needed additional energy. But now it seems like I think there has been in Africa where you have just solar power panels and then a fuel cell, and then the base station can really go off grid totally without having the need for diesel generator. And I know that especially in Eastern Asia, there's a lot of Southeastern Asia, there's a lot of need for diesel generators in Indonesia and Myanmar, and it costs hundreds of millions of liters of diesel every year for some operators. So I'm
Yes.
wondering if you want to if you have the goal to get, let's say, rid of diesel, and if you think that these standalone base stations running entirely on solar are possible and feasible for you. Thanks.
Yes, thank you for your question. That is definitely in the plan. In fact, we have recently also signed up, and Steven knows this, with the GSMA Net Zero. And so we are at this point uh, doing our roadmap along with the science-based targets on how we can replace and how we can do carbon neutrality and net zero emissions by at least 2030. So in terms of do are we changing our diesel? The answer is yes, definitely yes. So in the Philippines, we are blessed with because we have different 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 options in terms of clean energy, right? We have wind, we have lots and lots of sun because there are only 2 seasons in the Philippines. And obviously, I can't talk about water because we have all of these huge coastal areas, but we are still not able to harness water at this point in time. Um, so we're really looking at what other sources of clean energy we can use for our network. And so perhaps in the future, when we come back here with Stephen and you guys, maybe we can already report that, we have this kind of achievement in terms of our SBTI and net zero.
Very
Thanks.
much hope that's the case. Thanks, you. Thanks, Yoli.
Thank you.
Great. Okay,
Thank
well,
you.
in the interest of time, thanks very much, Yoli, for your presentation. In the interest of time, we will move on to our second presentation from Shannon at AT&T. Shannon, would you like to go ahead? If you're there. We can't hear you,
There we go. Had to make sure I unmuted there. Sorry, everybody.
Shannon.
So I was ready for the presentation, but I wasn't ready for the audio. So it sounds like you can hear me okay?
Yes, I can hear you fine now.
Okay. So yeah, so just here to talk about AT&T's approach to climate resiliency in particular. We're a very large company. We do a lot of different things these days, but when we talk about our purpose and what we're trying to do, we still get back to, connecting people and having a major impact. So as we frame the work that we do here on all things sustainability at AT&T, again, we always bring it back to, how are we connecting people, and how are we making an impact? So because of our size, we do have the ability to do things at scale. And this climate change analysis tool is another example of that. I just want to offer up for those who are interested in each of these slides, I try to include a link for everybody. If you're more interested in terms of our holistic approach, both on the social and the environmental, we have lots of information on that. We can go on days about that, but just want to be focused today on climate resiliency, but just pointing out the fact that, again, we have a holistic program and just want to provide folks with a resource who wants to read more about what we do, maybe on some of the different social things. Getting to the heart of the matter, climate change, obviously impacts everyone. By definition, it's a global issue. And I'm just going to take a couple of minutes to talk about the other side of the coin, because whenever you talk about climate change, you are talking about both mitigation, right? How do you reduce your own emissions? And also adaptation, how do you prepare for, inevitable, climate change impacts of the future? So I'm going to spend the bulk of it talking about our climate adaptation strategy, climate resiliency, but did want to start off with a nod to kind of the work we do to reduce our own emissions, because that question comes up all the time, regardless of the presentation or forum. So, beyond, classic kind of, I think what we think of a typical is, energy efficiency efforts, right? Trying to drive kilowatts out of the business. We're always focused on that. But the other thing that we do at scale now is renewable energy. There's just a question about renewable energy. AT&T is now one of the largest corporate purchasers, of renewable energy in the United States. Just in terms of capacity, we're just a little bit over 1.5 gigawatts. And so we're continuing to do more. But in terms of scale and how to reduce our emissions with the amount of energy that we use, renewable energy is obviously the way to go for us. Most of our emissions are associated with purchased electricity. So we're all in on this. And again, just offering a resource for those who are interested in kind of more of the work that we're doing around renewable energy. We also have a goal to not only reduce our own emissions, but reduce our customers' emissions, and that's what we call our 10X goal. The idea is that we want to reduce our customer emissions 10 times what our own emissions are. So just think about the products and the services that we offer and, putting those out in lieu of more carbon-intensive products and services. right? So again, trying to reduce our own customer emissions are a really important part of what we do from that mitigation perspective. And then there's a reference earlier, we agree science-based targets are the way to go. We have a science-based target, and really that's going to be the thing that keeps you in line, right, to the international consensus, the scientific consensus of what we need to do to keep the emissions below a point, right, with that causes the worst impacts of climate change. So reduce our emissions, largely through renewable. We're reducing our customer emissions, and we've also committed to a science-based target to track and report out on our own emissions reduction. So again, I'd be remiss if we didn't talk a little bit about that mitigation side. So I'll spend the bulk of the time here, though, on, again, the resiliency side, the adaptation side. How do you prepare for, future climate change impacts? And just to kind of set the stage, this is a project that kicked off about 5 years ago, where we realized we had a lot of things unofficially, right, happening within the company around climate change, or that you can argue were climate change related, but we didn't have a formal program. And, there's the internal need to do it just because, you're spending hundreds of millions of dollars a year recovering from severe weather events, right? So there's a material impact to your business, obviously. But also the external landscape changed a bit, right? It wasn't just, looking at governments and NGOs to talk about climate change. It was really, there's a shift and said, okay, corporations, you need to do something around climate change as well. And even though we were, the fact that it wasn't formal, really was a gap for us. So we, identified that and really fixed that, not only through our larger climate change program, but again, specifically through this climate change analysis tool that we're going to be, talking about as well. Excuse me. When we were initially assessing the need and identifying that gap in terms of what we're doing well on climate and not, excuse me, one of the first things that came up is, what is going to be your area of focus, right? And so for us, at the end of the day, we, again, talking about that connectivity, we're still a network company. So our area of focus for the climate change analysis tool was really around the network. And how do we maintain the physical assets that we have in the ground today, right, in terms of preparing them for climate change? Because some of the things that we have in the ground today will be around 20 years from now. And then as we build out the network of the future, how do we site, that equipment? How do we place that in equipment that is least susceptible as possible anyway to the impacts of climate change? So that's, really, was our focus. That's really what we did is, what's our strengths, where are our gaps? And then we quickly came to the determination that although this tool, as you'll see, is applicable, many different ways, when we launched it, the core was really to focus on the network. The tool itself, as best we could tell, nobody in terms of a corporation within our sector, at the very least, had done anything like this. So what we were trying to do just conceptually is, how do we get climate data? How do we put it in the hands of the folks that are responsible for maintaining our current network and planning our future network? And then how do we do that in a way that they can make good decisions? And in the beginning, it wasn't intuitive, right? How do you do that? Because there's lots of climate change data out there. The question is, how usable is it? What do you do with it? Can you ingest it into systems? There's all these type of questions. So, this is a big issue, right, by definition again. So the first thing we realize is if we're going to try to do this, let's try to do it at a scale that's doable, right, that's reasonable. And tackling global climate change was too big just for us as our own entity. And even tackling domestic for us within the United States was too big, right? Especially since nobody was doing anything like this. So we said, okay, let's focus on a region that's very susceptible to severe weather events, to climate change impact. And we did that for what we call our Southeast region in the United States. We chose Florida, Georgia, South Carolina, and North Carolina at the start. And then the other thing, going back to the connection to the network, is, okay, we have lots of infrastructure there. That region is very susceptible to severe weather events. But what type of climate change impacts are you looking for? Because there's lots of different climate change impacts, right? There's precipitation, there's heat, there's all type of things. So again, we went right to the folks that do this for for their kind of daily responsibilities and said, hey, what are your biggest worries when it comes to severe weather events? And flooding and high intensity wind speed are the two that came up. So that's the other way that we kind of scoped this project. We said, okay, we're going to do it in the Southeast, and we're going to look at flooding and high intensity wind speed. That was really important, right? Because this gave us enough limits in a positive way to really move forward and really kind of drive towards a desired outcome. And this was our guiding post at this point, which is, focusing on this region and these areas. Now, when you talk about flooding, there's lots of different things that go into that. There's coastal flooding, there's inland flooding. When you talk about wind speed, there's wind speed that's associated with hurricanes, which we might typically think of. There's also high intensity winds that are independent of hurricanes. So we want to look at that as well. So this is kind of just the view as we were going in. I bring this up in terms of where we got the data because it's an important question people ask us. The tool is only as good as the data that you're getting. And for us, we did a wide research net in terms of, what climate data should we use, can we get a hold of? And there's no shortage of climate data out there. Again, the issue is how usable is it? How downloadable is it? How easy is it to manipulate for the purposes that you need it in terms of putting it into different systems? And the answer quickly became, there's not a lot of very easy to use climate data. So we figured, okay, let's just go to somebody who does this, for a living, so to speak. And that was Argonne National Labs within the United States. They're part of the U.S. government Department of Energy. They already do the climate modeling for the U.S. government. And for our purposes, which was really helpful, they have also the only publicly available North American climate model. Most climate models are global, which makes sense, but they actually had a North American model, which is really impactful to us. And just in our conversations, they had the ability to get to what we needed, which is, I just call it, my non-scientific term, is neighborhood scale. So a lot of the data points that you get cover a big part of the geography, right? So you'll get one data point that covers anywhere from 12 kilometers to 100 kilometers of territory. And we needed something, better than that, right? We needed to get down to meters if we could. And Argonne was able to do that. So all the data points that we have for the tool get down to 200 meter by 200 meter. So there's still some variance, but that's, pretty darn good, and that's usable. So just jumping into the tool itself, because I know that's what most folks want to see and want to talk about. And this is just, unfortunately, I can't give you a live demonstration, but this is, just a snapshot from the early development of the tool. And I'll kind of walk you through it if it's not immediately intuitive what we're trying to do here. And all the tool does, it's very simple, actually. Once you get down to it, the tool takes, the best climate data that you can get with, again, what we'd call the neighborhood level, and then it overlays that into a mapping system. So we had a mapping system, a GIS system that we were using. We have several that we use in the company, but there's one that we use predominantly that covers, several business units. And so the idea was get this really good climate data from Argonne, overlay that into the existing mapping tool that we use, and then now you can give, again, the people that are responsible for maintaining and planning the network a visual representation of the data and how it can potentially impact the network infrastructure. So the bottom left box there, what you see there is actually our fiber layout and our cell sites in Savannah, Georgia. And this is all available, and I'll reference this later as well, in a public white paper for those who want to really get into the details. And then obviously just color coded, right, by flooding, right? Red bad, and then on the left good. One thing I like to point out to folks is what's just as valuable on this map is that area that's not covered by flooding, right? So when you're talking about disaster recovery, business continuity planning, where are you going to put a new network? Where are you going to put resources, for incoming storm? It's just as important to know what's not at risk than what is at risk. So I hope that makes sense. And that's a very kind of powerful visual component of the tool as well is, you can have an area that is really close together, and one of those are in red and one of those have, no color, right? So there's no flooding whatsoever. That's really important. The other thing that this tool did for us is it showed us that even in small geographic areas, the exposure is not the same. You would think in a coastal city like this, within a couple square miles, this view is that coastal flooding is going to impact the coast in the same way. Well, it doesn't, right? So if you look at some of these little green dots there, I can't bring that up live, but if you click on those, what you'll see and what the engineers and the planners will see is once they click on any part of this map, another window pops up and it tells them exactly, right, with what we call a 95% confidence interval, what the maximum flooding is going to be at that point for that piece of equipment, right? So if you have a cell tower that has a platform already built in where the batteries are up high, and you click on that and it tells you, you're susceptible to 6 feet of flooding, that's an issue, but maybe you don't need to do anything, right? If you click on another cell tower that's just, say a half mile away, and let's say that's only 3 feet of flooding, but your batteries are on the ground level and there's no platform, well, that's an issue, right? And that's what the tool does, right? It just gives these engineers, these network planners, the availability to click on any location or any piece of equipment that they're responsible for and look at the climate change impact, right? Specific to flooding and wind in this case. So another example would be something like a central office, right? Which is just a connection point for a neighborhood. So all the lines in the local neighborhood end up in the central office. Well, if you have a central office and you click somewhere on here and it shows, there's 12 feet of flooding, you may have some decisions to make, right? You click on another central office and there's, again, let's just say there's 4 feet of flooding, but all your equipment is on the second floor, then again, you don't have to do anything in that situation. So we approach this very humbly from a sustainability perspective. Our job is to not tell anybody what to do with the data. Our job is to make the data available, make sure everybody knows that it's available and how to use it, and then let the network engineers and the network planners, the folks who know how susceptible fiber is to water, the folks that know how susceptible a central office is to 2 feet versus 10 feet of flooding, to get them the data and let them make a decision, right? So it's how they weight that, and what decisions that they make is really up to them. And I know I'm approaching time here, and I think another thing is people ask us all the time, well, what have you already replaced? And we're going through all that now in terms of identifying our high risk areas. There's going to be instances that you have a piece of equipment out there that is susceptible to some type of climate change impact. However, it's maybe low cost and really easy to repair, right? Those are the things that you may leave, and you may go ahead and say, well, we'll just repair those and fix those as they go down. And then you have other pieces of equipment that are more vital, and they're really expensive to repair, and the repair time is really long, and it gives you the ability then to focus on those. So that's what the tool does. Happy to answer any questions. Real point, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that part of our commitment here was making sure that the data that we received from Argonne National Labs, we did not keep it for ourselves. Obviously, we used it first, but since we've received that data, we've made it all publicly available. So anybody right now could go and download the Argonne climate data that we received, or the AT&T climate data that we received from Argonne. Just do a quick search. It's downloadable and anybody can use it. Obviously, if you're not a climate scientist or doing network infrastructure planning, it may not be that usable to you, but the information is out there. And then finally, this is the white paper I referenced earlier. In terms of white papers, it's very readable. It's co-authored by AT&T and Argonne National Labs, but it does go into the details in terms of what modeling that we use, what kind of like physical downscaling did we do, if you're interested in that type of thing. Where's the master data coming from, right, through the IPCC and things of that nature. So I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Shannon. Really interesting to see all the work that you guys have done and partnering with a national resource on this tool. Any questions for Shannon? Either just shout them out or feel free to put them in the chat box.
That means I explained it so well, everything was crystal clear. That's what that means.
You did. They've just taken it all in.
Can I ask a question, Stephen?
Sure thing.
Can I ask
Of course,
a
Shirley,
question?
go ahead.
Okay, Shannon. As a member of the same industry, does AT&T provide the Argon tool? I mean, can you share it with some other telcos like ourselves, for instance?
Yes, the short answer is yes. And the tool itself, there's obviously some issues, proprietary issues, but the data, right? The tool is really, an existing GIS tool, or geographic information system, just a mapping tool for those who aren't familiar, which most folks have. So we just leveraged our existing mapping tool, and then we overlaid the climate data into that. And that climate data is 100% publicly available today.
Okay. So maybe we can hook up with you, right?
Absolutely. Yep.
Thank you.
Thanks, Yoli. I think we did just have one other question, and that was Shannon. Any thoughts on the forest fires on the west coast? So obviously you've been talking about the southeast of the US, but California has a big problem with damage from the natural world on the west coast.
Yeah, obviously they're getting hitting really hard right now. I'm from California originally, so that's impacting the entire state and the region really. The short answer is so depending on how that was framed, but I'll interpret it to like, are we looking towards that? And the short answer is yes. Obviously we are. We did the pilot because we wanted to make sure we can actually do it, right? I mean, this was not a done deal when we launched it. We did not know if we'd be able to build this tool in a way that was useful and relevant. We have proved out internally the relevance, and there's been lots of interest externally as well. So we are definitely looking to expand the tool. And then I think partly what we'll do or strategically is as we expand the tool, we'll want to make sure that we're also looking at the different climate impacts for that specific region, right? So the Southeast, again, yes, there's network reasons for looking at flooding and high wind speed, but that's also what's, the major climate change impacts in the Southeast region of the U.S. are. If you go to the Southwest, that shifts, right? You may be looking at wildfire or drought. So we'll make sure we make those adjustments as well.
Okay, fantastic. I think we might have I've got a couple of people to maybe put you in touch with after this
Okay.
call, Shannon, to follow up with. But thank you very much for that. Very useful. So we'll go across to Andy now at Vodafone. Andy, apologies because we are a little bit over in terms of time. But if you'd like to go ahead and share your screen, fantastic. And if you can go into full screen, that would be even better. Yeah, perfect. Great.
Yes.
So Andy, I'll hand over to you.
Perfect. Thanks, Steve, and thanks everyone else. Yeah, really interesting insights into kind of very different geographic climate risks, which shows how it's such a global challenge that we're all facing. So yes, Andy from Vodafone. Those who don't know, we are predominantly a European and African-based telco. So very different climate risks, if you can imagine, north to South Europe and across the east coast of Africa predominantly, but also North Africa and a number of joint ventures in places like India and Australia. So a huge climate range across the globe. And similarly, yes, we've got a purpose, probably similar to a lot of other organizations, about connecting for a better future and improving 1 billion lives and halving our environmental impact by 2025. So the kind of climate risk sits across all these, but a lot of it is also in the planet area where a lot of my focus is. I'm going to do a slightly different change of tact to the more physical resilience and how you cope with climate change to discuss a kind of wider integration into the kind of business, which is where I'm most active. We do have quite similar physical resilience programs, be it through planning, voluntary or regulation, and designing of our infrastructure. But I'm going to touch more on the top-down company approach. All of us are aware that, climate change is key on the agenda. It's really important to all of our stakeholders. It's something we have to take seriously. And even through the kind of the COVID crisis, climate change has still come out as a key driver. And that's because it is such a big risk to all of our businesses and all of the way we live our lives. And if you think COVID's bad, if we live in a world of runaway climate change and biodiversity collapse, we won't have much left to hold on to. So what the approach I'm going to take is what we've been working on for the past few years and going on for another year, which is all around the TCFD, which is a series of recommendations that came out a few years ago. It's about aligning corporate behavior and processes with the kind of financial risks and opportunities so that you can both internally understand how climate will impact your business and then express that externally and manage that risk, as previously there was a bit of a disconnect. We're headquartered in the UK, so we report within the UK reporting system. TCFD is going to become a mandatory reporting requirement by 2022. Likewise, across the EU, non-financial reporting directive is being updated, and this is a trend that's going to be more common globally to really have a kind of set way of looking into climate risk and embedding it and reporting it so that everyone has a similar approach. So just before I go into the more complicated details, we've heard great presentations on the kind of physical resilience and how to manage and enact and make change there. There's also a few kind of much more softer climate change risks that it's also worth being aware of. And this is around things like your talent pipeline, attracting the best employees, retaining those employees you have at the moment who care about working for somewhere that does have a purpose and are taking serious the issues that are emotional to a lot of our staff and people. And then there's the external risks, be it for your customers and customer base and your access to finance and how you're rated as an organization and company. And these are all worth bearing in mind when you discuss climate change with your senior managers or your staff, that actually it goes beyond the clear risks and actually permeates a lot of the business. If you want to be successful in long term, you need to be taking action and consider some of these issues. So diving a little bit into TCFD. For those that don't know, it's a series of recommendations. It's got quite strong pickup, and it's all around how you manage your climate risks, but also your opportunities. And some of the most significant parts are around the governance. So do you have the governance structures in place to manage climate across your company? Is your strategy right? Are you addressing the potential risks? For example, are you looking at how climate change might impact your infrastructure through building a tool like AT&T were describing? Is that built into your company strategy? Risk management is the area a lot of people focus on and kind of the biggest one. And the most important area here is doing a scenario-based analysis. So that is looking at different climate potential futures and how that will impact your business. And finally, have you got the right metrics and targets in place? Are you measuring it? Are you reporting it? Are you expressing what these risks might actually mean for your company and therefore making the changes needed? So in the interest of time, I'm going to move on. TCFD was released in 2017. Again, it had quite a rapid initial uptake and quite a lot of interest, and it does take a long time to really adopt it. This is a kind of the expected time frame for full adoption of TCFD. And if you kind of think up here on the top right-hand corner, when it becomes mandatory will vary in your market, but it does take time to get there. So if you see this coming down the line, it's worth considering now. And it does take an iterative process to really start pulling together those various bits of your company. We have risk team in our company who look at risks. Usually on quite a short time frame. We have property team that deal with the resilience of our infrastructure, who do assess, when we're building new technology, is this, going to survive the next 10 years? Will it survive if actual flooding or wildfires or storm events increase in frequency and scale? Are they modeling that in? And again, it depends on our markets. A lot of our European market, part of the planning requirements do include climate change considerations. However, are they, do they meet what we believe is going to be the future climate change? Are they too weak? Are they not strong enough? But then if you go to our kind of more the global south markets where that planning regulation isn't as strong, do we have the internal opportunities there to really look and challenge and make sure we're building correctly? So when we've done our kind of group overlay climate risk assessment and opportunities, this is where we're at the moment. So we're at the stage now where we've got a group company-wide assessment of what we think climate change will be over the next short to medium to long term, right out to 2050. And we've identified a number of opportunities, a number of risks, and how now we're getting to that stage where we're trying to delve that down into a very small scale local market level or regional level impact. As you can see, there's a great number of risks. Like a lot of companies, we have great ability to enable carbon reduction through offering better services, especially kind of IoT products, which really reduce the carbon emissions of other companies and helps to save them energy, carbon, money, really drive change. So climate change isn't all bad. There's opportunities there for us to make new products and really help and support the wider societal shift. And then again, there's the green bond. We similarly launched a green bond, and it's a great way to access finance at ideally a lower base rate, so you're saving money on your investments because there's less risk and it's in an area that people want to support. One of the biggest risks, if you consider climate change, is the transitional risks. Now, these can happen on a much shorter time frame than the longer term physical changes. A half-degree warming over 10, 15 years won't have a significant impact on your business in your kind of planning and business cycles, which often run, up to 3 years maybe. But a transitional risk might. And this is all around how governments and national and international bodies look at climate change and apply new requirements on organizations to behave. Some of the biggest ones we see is, say, changes to renewable energy, carbon taxation, carbon reporting, for example, TCFD reporting. That's a risk we have to be aware of. If we hadn't planned for it and we suddenly had a new regulation on top of us, we wouldn't have in place the right processes to manage this. There's also talks, especially across the kind of Green Deals being developed, kind of cross-border carbon adjustments. That would be a tax on importing high carbon goods from abroad. Would that impact our bottom line on our purchasing of new 5G equipment? And also kind of what's the ESG and investor pressure on us? Suddenly, if we have a lot of pressure to change quickly, to rapidly decarbonize, have we planned that into our company's strategy? What will the costs be? How will that impact us? So transitional risks can be short-term and really impactful, and it's worth considering and planning them into your climate change strategy and assessments and bringing that into your risk profile and risk process. Then on the physical risks, similar to what's been described previously, it's the flooding, it's the storm events, it's the potential for greater wildfire, and have you got those in place? It's also the kind of the less acute, more chronic impacts. If temperatures increase, will you use your cooling equipment more? Will you need more energy to power that? Will you need to invest in free cooling technologies or lower carbon cooling to offset any increased costs? How will that impact your bottom line or your business activity? Again, if the humidity increases, will that mean your actual service to your customers is worse because of the humidity in the air affecting your signal? Things like this, which potentially aren't considered in your traditional kind of risk and property assessment, but could be significant across the scale of your company. So how did we get to these kind of main risks? Well, we had to do a scenario-based assessment. So we took 3 kind of main scenarios based upon, I think it was the Bank of England's planning, which had recently been announced. So there's the smooth transition, which is kind of the early policy action, the less than 2 degree world, everyone takes change now. And again, there's benefits to that in terms of opportunities, there's lower risks, however, there might be more transitional risks. The disruptive transition is when very little happens for the next 10, 15 years, and then suddenly everyone realizes, wow, we need to really tackle climate change. And there's a lot of change happens very rapidly. Again, less opportunity for benefit, greater risk of very rapid transitional changes and new laws and legislation, and again, quite severe physical impacts. And then finally, business as usual, nothing happens. As you can imagine, there's a much greater climate impact on our physical, but much less transitional risk. So we plugged all this into a big model. As you can see, we then assessed different scenarios, brought that down into the business, checked it against our various parts of the business, which impact, get the input from our risk team, our property team, our finance team, our local markets, and their kind of local level input. So we could really start to build a model where we can assess all of these risks and opportunities and test if we are going to be able to be a successful company over the medium and long term in a world that is going through climate change. And the outcome is, we have a nice model that we're now trying to really localize to a market. We then can have that and embed that process and strategy into the company. We can use to see if we are managing our risks well, if we have the right governance in place, and if we are treating our risks with sufficient priority. A lot of climate risks are accelerators of other risks. Are we embedding that into our risk strategy and how we manage risks? And then finally, reporting, because a lot of the outcomes are really important to our investors, our customers, or our governments and areas that we operate. And again, we put a page in our annual report this year all about the TCFD and the risk process and risk disclosure we're going through. And it's becoming increasingly important to do so, to be seen as performing well in this area. I'll stop there and hopefully have time for questions.
Thank you, Andy. Really interesting. Fantastic model that you've created at Vodafone for assessing climate risk and really pulling it into the business strategy. That's excellent. Questions for Andy?
Hi, Andy. This is Maya from Telefonica. Congratulations for the presentation and the job you're doing. It's great. So just how you're finding, can you share the difficulties you are finding to the financial planning issue? Because we're finding that that's the most difficult part of it, and it's really relevant in terms of the integration on the global strategy of the company.
Yeah, financial planning is quite a challenge, especially as you kind of think, I don't know about everyone else, but our financial planning usually 3 years out is a long term for them. They're thinking about rollout of technology and business numbers that long. When we try and say we have climate targets, we have climate risks out 20, 30 years, it's a whole different story. There's a whole different mindset for them to get to. The easier ones are the short-term risks, so the transitional risks. They're definitely, you can say, we expect a carbon tax in the next few years. This might add X% to our spend. Or, we need to start transitioning to 100% renewable electricity now because it might become a requirement in some of our markets. There's some parts that are easier, some parts that aren't. And it's all about engaging the finance people and talking them through the story is what we've found. Really explaining what we think the risks are, asking them how that would be integrated into their financial planning, and asking them to keep it in mind and keep that consideration, even if they're only thinking on a 3-year cycle, but also to have that. So a lot of it has been around education and engagement on a lot of these risks. But yes, I feel you. It's definitely a challenge to get hard numbers, and predicting anything that long is difficult. And yes, the accuracy is always plus or minus quite a lot, which the finance people don't really like.
Thank you. Stephen, I think you're on mute.
Thanks, Maya. Any last questions for Andy or for any of our presenters? Okay, in which case, thank you very much, Andy, Yoli, and I think Shannon's had to drop off because he's got to do the school run. But I will be circulating the presentations that we've had today. Very, very helpful.